Algebra 2. This is Unit 11, Lesson 7, and today this video is about graphing sine and cosine graphs. So sine and cosine graphs can be easily graphed by considering their values at the quadrantal angles. Those are the ones that are 90, 180, 270, 360, or pi over 2. So in physics and calculus, most of the trig graphing is done with radians, not degrees. I will show you both right here. We'll work more in degrees this year. Next year, though, you will work more in radians. So remember that the unit circle, it has a radius of 1. And when I have my point xy, cosine is my x and sine is my y. So that we already talked about earlier. So I'm just going to label this a little bit. So I got 0, this is 90 degrees, this is 180 degrees, this is 270 degrees, and then if I come all the way back around, this is also 360 degrees. If I go the other way, then this is negative 90, this is negative 180, this is negative 270, and this is negative 360. Okay? Now I'm going to do this in blue. I'm going to write down the coordinates. So at this point right here, that's the point 1, 0. So basically cosine is 1 and sine is 0. At 90 degrees, this is the point 0, 1. So cosine of 90 is 0, sine of 90 is 1. Because remember xy, this is cosine and this is sine. So just keep that in mind. This point over here is negative 1, 0, and the point down here at 270 is 0, negative 1. Okay, so let's fill in this chart right here, basically just by using the unit circle. So, I'm going to start with 0, 90, 180, 270, 360, and then I'll do the negatives. So sine of 0, so I'll highlight it up here. Sine of 0, sine is my y value. I'm going to highlight all of them. Sine is my y, sine is my y, sine is my y. So sine of 0 is 0. Sine of 90 is 1. Sine of 180 is 0. Sine of 270 is negative 1. And sine of 360, I'm back at 0 again. This right here is considered to be one cycle. All right, so this is one cycle. And these down here are my critical values. I'm going to keep those in mind because if I know them, then these are super easy to graph. Let's do the negatives going in the other direction. So negative 90 is negative 1. I'm just getting this right off the unit circle up there. Negative 180 is 0. Negative 270 is 1. And negative 360 is 0. Okay, but you can see that these numbers are just repeating themselves. So my critical values are 0, 1, 0, negative 1, and 0. All right, what does this look like on a graph? So this is 0 degrees, okay, and sine is 0. At pi over 2 or 90, sine is 1. At pi or 180, sine is 0. At 270 or 3 pi over 2, sine is negative 1. And at 2 pi, which is also 360, sine is 0 again. So this is what it looks like. It's a curved graph. And that's the sine. Now if I was to do the negative values, then this would just continue in that curve. So once you have those, you actually don't, I can look at the table to find these, but I know that it also looks like that. All right? And again, this right here is considered to be one cycle. One complete cycle. I'm starting at 0, I'm going up, come to 0, go down, and go back up to 0. So it's one wave. All right? Let's look at the cosine. So same unit circle, right? This is 0, 90, 180, 270, but this time I'm doing cosine. Cosine is my x-coordinate, right? So cosine is my x. So we'll start at 0 again. Cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of 90 or pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of 180 or pi is negative 1. Cosine of 270 or 3 pi over 2 is 0 and 1. This is considered one cycle, just like before with sine, and these are my critical values. Now I can go in the negative direction and it would just repeat themselves really. So this would be 0, -1, 0, and 1. So go to graph these. This time cosine of 0 is 1, pi over 2 or 90 is 0, pi or 180 is -1, 3 pi over 2 is 0, and 2 pi is 1. So it starts at 1, but it's still that curve. It's called a wave. This is one complete cycle. I'm going to put the negatives on my graph also just so you can see them. Okay, and that is my cosine graph. So you can see my domain is from negative pi to pi. My range, my lowest value is -1. My highest value is 1. The critical values for sine, one cycle, 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. That's for one cycle. And cosine is 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1. Again, that's for one cycle. So you have to memorize those critical values. I mean, you could figure them out by looking in the calculator or the unit circle. Now this is something we haven't talked about in a while, odd or even. The sine curve is odd. Remember, it's odd if there's symmetry with the origin. If I was to take that sine curve and flip it upside down, it is symmetric. The cosine curve is an even function because it's symmetric with the y-axis. Symmetry with the y-axis. I have one more thing to talk about, and that's the amplitude. And then I have some extra problems. We can try a few of them. I won't try all of them with you, but just so you get the idea of this graphing. Amplitude is the height of the graph. All right, so if I change the coefficient of the number in front of sine or cosine, we refer to that as our A. That changes the height. All right, so I'm not going to put these in the calculator for you. I'm just going to tell you basically what goes on. This is a graph of y equals cosine of x. You can see that it starts here at 0, 1, and then it's 0, my critical values, right? So my critical values are 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1 again. Now when you're graphing these in your graphing calculator, you do have to be in radians, so that's a little bit different. I'm just going to write down my critical values for cosine, and I just said them, but they are 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1. So those are my critical values. If I have an A, so that is a coefficient in front, all you're doing is you're multiplying the critical values, and you can do this in the calculator if you want to see it for yourself. You're just multiplying those critical values by that coefficient. So 1 times 3 is 3, 0 times 3 stays 0, -1 times 3 is -3, 0 times 3 stays 0, and 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so my graph just gets a little taller, but it has the same shape, 1, 2, 3, so it's 0, 3, 0 stays the same, it's -3, 0, and 3. So my graph looks like this. And in the other direction, same thing is happening. And there is my graph of y equals 3 cosine of x in red. If I have a negative number, I'm just going to, again, multiplying the critical values. So I'm always multiplying these critical values by that coefficient. So my new critical values would be -4, 0, 4, 0, -4. So it's actually going to just be upside down. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm starting here at -4, 0, 4, 0, -4. And then in the opposite direction, 0, 4, 0, -4. So my curve looks like this. It's flipped upside down when I have the negative. And we've talked about transformations before, so that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. That negative just reflects it over the x-axis. So that's the one that I have in purple. The purple graph is y equals -4 cosine of x. The red graph is y equals 3 cosine of x. And all I'm doing is changing those critical values. The same exact thing is going to happen with sine. So remember, y equals sine of x. My critical values are 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. So I have those graphed. I already have the sine graphed right there. Y equals 4 sine of x. I'll just grab a different color. I'm just going to multiply all my critical values by 4. So they're going to be 0, 4, 0, -4, 0. So this would just be my new graph. 4, 0, -4, 0. Go in the opposite direction. And there's my sine. It's just taller, but it's the same curve. It's still at the origin. So remember that sine, the sine graph goes through the origin 0, 0. The cosine graph does not. All right, so that's y equals 4 sine of x in blue, and then I'll do y equals -3 sine of x. So that one's going to be multiplied by 3, but it's also getting reflected. So my critical values are 0, -3, 0, 3, 0. So that one's in purple. So 0, -3, 0, 3, 0, and the opposite way. And there is my graph of y equals -3 sine of x. So that's the amplitude. If I have a number, so this one is y equals -3 sine of x. The blue one is y equals 4 sine of x. So that's what the amplitude does. Oops, I ran out of room right there. Okay, so the amplitude is the height of the waves for a sinusoidal graph. So that's for sine or cosine. We refer to that as a sinusoidal graph. That just means sine and cosine. The amplitude is the absolute value of A. That's the height. The amplitude is the absolute value of A. All right, so I'll try one or two of these on the next page, but there's nothing really different with them. When graphing the sinusoidal curves with amplitude, you must write down the critical values for sine or cosine, and then all you're going to do is multiply those critical values by A. And we're going to graph for one cycle. Sometimes they'll tell me to do more than one cycle, but this one is specifically telling me to do it from -pi to pi. So my critical values, this is a sine graph, right? The critical values for sine start at 0. Critical values for cosine start at 1. The amplitude is 2, so my new critical values are going to be 0, 2, 0, -2, and 0. Now we're working in radians here, so this is going to be for 0, this is going to be for pi, which is 180, this is going to be for 2 pi. Okay, so now I'm going to graph more than this, and then we'll just box off my answer. So I'm starting here at 0, and I think what I'll do is I'll skip every other box, okay? So this will be pi, and this will be 2 pi, all right? And I have, this will just be 1, and this will be 2, this will be -1, this will be -2. So going in the opposite direction, oops. So we got, this is pi over 2, this is going to be -pi, and this will be -2 pi. Okay, so then I just have all the ones in between, but I'll just be labeling 0 pi, 2 pi. But in between I have pi over 2 and I have 3 pi over 2. So my graph, maybe I'll do it in a different color for us. So I'm starting at 0. My next value is 2, then it's 0, then it's -2, and then it's 0. All right, and then just go in the opposite direction. So I'm at 0, so that's going to be -2, 0, +2, 0. So here's my graph. Now they really just wanted it from -pi to pi, so I'll just box that off and that'll be my answer. But I find it easier to do the whole thing, so I want from -pi to pi. There's a solution that they wanted. Okay? So whatever if they tell you a specific cycle or section to do, then do that section. Otherwise, you're always going to do one cycle. I mean, sometimes they might ask you to do 2 cycles, but you can just plot those points accordingly. All right, so that should give you an idea of the graphing.